The Dollars Seen Differently podcast is produced by CNIB in collaboration with financial experts to provide educational content on financial literacy. The information provided in this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and should not be construed as personal financial advice. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official stance of CNIB. CNIB and its affiliates shall not be held liable for any actions taken by listeners based on the information provided in this podcast. Listeners are solely responsible for their financial decisions and should exercise caution and discretion when implementing any strategies discussed in the podcast.
Seen differently.
Hey, everybody out there listening, welcome back to Dollars Seen Differently. This is Ryan Hui, and we got a great one for you today. We have two guests, and we're going to be talking about financial aid. So for those that want to go back to school, maybe those that are just graduating high school, we got the show for you. So we're here, we're doing it, and we're going to get right into it. Joining me today is Ellis Parsons and Joanna Angelidis. How's everybody doing?
Great, how are you?
I'm doing well. No one's ever asked me that, I don't think. But Joanna, how about you?
I'm doing great as well. Thank you.
Great. I want to start with Ellis. So could you introduce us, tell us a little bit about your role with CNIB and everything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ryan, as you mentioned, my name is Ellis Parsons. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the program lead for Career and Employment Youth here at the CNIB. In my role, I connect with diverse job and education seekers to partner with them in navigating these sometimes overwhelming systems so that folks can feel a bit more confident accessing these resources and spaces. This often involves chatting about student financial aid, which is an important component to academic success. And living with sight loss myself, I also have experience applying for student financial aid.
And Joanna Angelidis, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your affiliation and where we can find you on social media and where we can find your organization on the web?
Wonderful. Sure. So I am the Associate Director of Student Wellbeing and Accessibility at BCIT, the British Columbia Institute of Technology. And I work with a team of accessibility specialists who work closely with students to ensure that students are informed about and have access to financial aid. So the department guides students through the various pathways available. They provide personalized support as well. And they collaborate closely with the financial aid team at BCIT as well. The financial aid team consists of experts that are dedicated to helping students secure the financial resources they're available to. So it's a collaborative effort involving students, the financial aid specialists, and the accessibility specialists. And that's my job.
You guys both sound really, really busy. Ellis, can you tell us where we can find the CNIB on the web?
Yeah, absolutely. So one website I always like to direct folks to is our Come to Work microsite. And so that's cometowork.ca, COMETOWORK.ca.
Thank you so much. And Joanna, what about you?
People can reach me or the entire team of accessibility service specialists at BCIT by going right to the website, and that is bcit.ca/accessibility.
Perfect. So is everybody ready to get into it?
For sure.
Awesome. Ellis, what type of financial aid is generally available for students?
Yeah, great question. So some sources of student financial aid that folks can access are the Canada Student Grant for Students with Disabilities, the Canada Student Grant for Services and Equipment, any institution-based scholarships and awards, external awards, provincial and federal student loans, and many other funding streams as well. It's important to explore the options that might be available to you, and ideally with someone who's familiar with these funding streams as well.
Joanna, Ellis had mentioned one important thing here, the Canada Student Grants for Students with Disabilities. What are the eligibility requirements for this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So eligibility is determined through your province or territory's student aid program, and criteria vary from province to territory. So for example, the grant is not available to students from the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, or Quebec, but they have their own student aid programs. So doing some research is really important. The eligibility criteria involve or include being enrolled in a full-time or part-time studies at a designated post-secondary institution, having a permanent or persistent or prolonged disability as defined by the Canada Student Financial Assistance Program, the CFSA. And it must be documented. So there are a few steps for sure. Demonstrating financial need is also part of the eligibility criteria, and your financial need is assessed through your province or territorial student aid application progress. In BC, and I'm fairly certain this would be the same in the other provinces, the difference between your educational costs and the available resources, such as your income, other grants that you're receiving, for example, would determine your demonstrated financial needs. And if you demonstrate these financial needs, you would be eligible for the loans and grants, including the Canada Student Grant.
I'm going to age myself here and say things have certainly changed a bit since I had to apply for financial aid back in the day, but it sounds like there's a lot going on there and there's a lot that folks would need to apply for this. How would people, what's the application process like, or how would people apply?
That is also a great question. So again, the process would vary depending on your province. In British Columbia, you would apply for federal grants like the Canada Student Grant through the Student Aid BC process. And so I'll just summarize a few steps and I'll qualify it with these are available online. Sometimes things change. And so I think it's really important for students to both do their own research, do it well in advance, but also connect with their post-secondary institutions support programs, whether it's accessibility services or financial aid. So having said that, the steps are that you apply for Student Aid BC. So you submit your application. It's an online process. You either apply for full-time or part-time financial aid, and then you would automatically be assessed for the Canada Student Grant for students with disability if your disability status has been verified. And so therefore, in your application process to Student Aid BC, you would be declaring your disability. And there are a few steps involved. It's called Appendix 8, Disability Programs Application Form. So you would go through that process, seeking assistance from the accessibility specialists and financial aid as you need it. Actually, having said that, I would say go through the process. And even if you think you've got everything done correctly, double check with these other departments as well, because there are some requirements on their part too. And it can be a complex process and you don't want to miss anything. So then to reiterate that the important things are to check your provinces or your territories, support your financial aid processes, do so online, do your own research, do it early, but then definitely connect with your post-secondary institutions, accessibility services departments, as well as their financial aid departments. Those departments may have slightly different names than what I'm sharing here, but double check with them as well. And I guess the other key points to keep in mind are the process varies from province to province or territory. And in BC, your application to Student Aid BC automatically involves an application for the Canada Student Grant for students with disabilities.
That certainly is a lot there, and the application process seems to be pretty in-depth. Now, as a side note, and to the best of your knowledge, do you know if a parent or guardian can help a student with the application process, or are there rules against it, or is it okay to?
It's very much the norm that people would be seeking assistance with the process because there's multiple steps, and the processes change from time to time, and they take a fair bit of time to sort out. So it's important to get assistance with it.
Dollars
seen differently.
Ellis, just a quick question for you. Do students have to be receiving loans to get access to this grant for students with disabilities?
No, so students don't need to take out loans to receive these grants. I believe there's actually an option for students to indicate whether they'd like to receive loans as part of their funding applications. But that said, if loans are dispersed, the student always has the option of repaying them right away if they aren't needed.
So do they have to take the full amount of their loans, or can they do kind of a half and half or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a very customizable process. So, as I mentioned, students can, elect to not receive any loans. They can elect to receive, the full amount of their loans. Or if they're looking for maybe an amount sort of in between those totals, then they could always repay a portion of their loans and sort of save that extra for any financial costs that they might incur.
Thank you for that. I didn't know that actually. I thought it was kind of a all or nothing sort of thing. So the customizable feature seems really great for that.
Absolutely.
Joanna, I'm just wondering, who can students talk to find out what grants or what loans they might be eligible for?
Yeah, also a great question. I think it's really important that students reach out to their post-secondary institution financial aid departments, as well as their accessibility services departments. There are people in both those departments that have deep knowledge on these processes and can work with students so that students have that accurate information and have it early on, because these processes can take a bit of time. And then also going to the Student Aid BC website as well and navigating through there. There's lots of good information in there.
Sometimes I sort of wished when I was in university and when I was in college that it was all the same. I did it in Ontario and then I went to school in the States as well. However, it was way different. So what worked with one didn't work with the other. So it's a little confusing. So that's a really important note to kind of always be checking with what your province and territory has or doesn't have. Because as we've mentioned with a few things so far, they're offered here, but maybe not there. And I'd invite you guys to go back and listen to that portion again, because it's really, really informative. Ellis, I think this is the one that everybody's been waiting for, because this is the big question. After you get all those loans and you do all of your things or all those grants and you graduate, what does repayment look like?
Yeah, for sure. So after students finish their studies, we have what we'd call a grace period lasting 6 months, where the student won't be required to make any payments on their provincial or federal student loans. This allows most folks to obtain employment and gain some financial stability before going into their repayment periods. Once in repayment, former students will be responsible for making a monthly loan payment, which will vary in amount based on their total loan balance. It's important to note that depending on where you live, you may also be paying interest on your student loans. In British Columbia, students are not required to pay interest on their provincial student loans, for example, but this isn't the case everywhere. On the other hand, you don't have to pay back any grants that you've received.
You got my question right there, because I had noticed that you kept using the word loans only, but I guess grants are the way to go. So if you can get your grants, then you don't have to pay those back. So that's really great. Love to hear that, and thank you for that information. So this one I want to kind of ask both and get both of you. I'm going to start with Joanna, but is there anything else that you think we should know or that students should know that we haven't touched on based on grants, loans, and everything that we kind of touched on? Or maybe was there something we missed?
Sure, absolutely. I think in addition to starting early and taking steps to be organized, I think it's important to remain persistent through the financial aid process. While you're researching online, and that's super important to understand your options, it's also essential to go beyond that and engaging directly with both the financial aid and the accessibility services department at your school, and being persistent in that. Don't assume that a step will occur that maybe somebody else's responsibility to do. Double check and just be sure that everything's in order. And also seek assistance with the steps, as you go throughout them, because there are multiple steps. And for many students, there's a lot at stake, and you don't want a delay in your education because there's a delay in the financial processes. And having said that, I think that with that kind of organization and persistence, I'm absolutely sure that, everything will be done on time, and that you can get the funding you need and go on to your education without unnecessary worries and all that goes along with that. And then I think the other thing I would say, and Ellis touched on this as well, I believe, is that there are other grants as well, in addition to the Canada Student Grant for students with disabilities. So other grants, other awards, bursaries, and so on. And so connecting to those two departments at your post-secondary institutions, the financial aid and the accessibility services, I think is also really important, just to see what else is available for you. I think those would be my main things that I want to share.
And Ellis, how about you?
Yeah, I would say explore your options as much as possible and don't be afraid to apply. I think that sometimes folks assume that their applications are likely to be rejected or maybe that it's not worth the effort of applying, but every dollar really does count as you're going through post-secondary. I can share from personal experience that I only ended up taking out a relatively small student loan when completing my 4-year undergraduate degree because the rest of my tuition and book costs were largely covered by many of the grants we've talked about today.
Wow, that sounds pretty lucky, and congrats on that because I know a lot of folks out there don't get that option, so that's really great for you, and congratulations on graduating. I don't know when it was, but amazing, and glad to have you as part of the team.
I love what Ellis said there in that last thing. Ellis, I think that's like important to emphasize, right? That like just apply for a variety, like do your research and apply for a variety of financial aid options, right? Just put your application in and just see what comes back to you. And then if you don't use it or need it, great. But at least you're organized in advance.
Yeah, no, I think that's my biggest takeaway, honestly, with all of this is just to apply. I think sometimes people's applications sort of stop before they start, unfortunately. And so if we can really encourage people to go out there and put those applications in, that's really the best thing for you.
I wonder if sometimes those application processes stop just because there are so many steps. And that can be complex. And so like you're going through these forms and you're filling out this and you're linking here and you're cross-checking criteria. That's a lot, so I think like that persistence, it's just a long form. Just cautious with my language, but like I've procrastinated on forms and then I've missed out on things, so hence that persistence.
And just from your knowledge, Joanna, how strict are the deadlines? If it says October 1st, is there no grace period? If it's in, it's in. If it's not, it's not.
I don't know if there's any flex on that from like the Student Aid BC perspective. Within the various post-secondary institutions, there can be some support with financial costs. So there can be urgent or emergency financial aid. There's like criteria around that, of course. There can be some tuition payment deferrals, but there again, like it varies at each post-secondary institution and there's like criteria around it.
No, and that's fair enough. And also from your experience, do you notice that a lot of students will apply nearest to the deadline and, like you said, procrastinate rather than getting it out on January 1st or whatever the date is that it comes available and says, hey, start applying now? Do you find that most students will wait till the very end?
I don't know if I would say that most students wait until the very end. I think it's more that students, that there are a lot of steps involved in, applying, registering, all that kind of stuff when you're getting started in a post-secondary institution. I think it's more that students may think that they've left a reasonable amount of time, but that they come up against these multi-step processes where they're waiting for, other departments to kind of do their part. And so, pretty quickly, it can add up to a lot of time, even though someone may have thought initially that they had left a fair bit of time for it. So that's where I would start early and be organized and check in on the process. Like contact the accessibility services, check in how it's going, contact the financial aid department, and just be sure that everything's done.
I think a lot of students, when they're applying for this, will also be receiving some sort of support payments, whether it's a monthly check or a monthly expense costs from their provincial government. Like I know I'm in Ontario, so it would be from ODSP. Do we know or do we have any advice for when you're applying for student loans or student grants when it comes to your payments for disability support?
Yeah, I think, again, the key here is really to double check whether any of those things will impact each other. So as you mentioned, Ryan, sometimes receiving grants or loans might affect those monthly payments. And so you want to double check with their offices and just make sure that everything is all lined up before you proceed with your applications, just so you don't end up in a tricky situation.
Thank you both so much for all of the information here. This has been wonderful. Again, that is Ellis Parsons and Joanna Angelidis. And I really want to thank you both for joining me. And can you give us the websites one more time for folks to go ahead and find you guys? Should they be looking out for anything?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me and the rest of the Come to Work team at cometowork.ca. So that's COMETOWORK.ca.
And you can find me and the rest of the BCIT Accessibility Services team at bcit.ca/accessibility.
Best of luck to all the students returning to school and all those that are about to graduate. Congratulations, and we hope to see you all very, very soon. Signing off from Dollars Seen Differently.
Dollars Seen Differently.
This is the Dollars Seen Differently podcast, and we are cashing out. I'm your host, Ryan Hui. Very special thank you to all of our guests. This episode was produced by the CNIB Financial Literacy Working Group. David Stinson is our associate producer, with additional production assistance from Sean Roman and Blair Stainton. It was edited by Sean Roman and engineered by the team at CNIB Beyond Print. Sean Roman provided our theme music, used under Creative Commons Fair License 4.0. Special thank you to the CNIB Idea team. For more information on CNIB, please visit our website at www.cnib.ca.
Dollars
Seen Differently.